Today we are diving into one of the most surprising and ironic events in military history, a moment when the Japanese Imperial Navy tried to bend reality in their favor by manipulating their own war games. But in the end, they lost in real life exactly the same way the original dice rolls predicted. This is the shocking story of how Japan's rigged war games foreshadowed the disaster at the Battle of Midway long before a single plane took off. And how ignoring those warnings helped seal the fate of the entire Pacific War. To understand this story, we need to go back to early 1942. Japan had just pulled off the impossible. They attacked Pearl Harbor, destroyed much of the American Pacific Fleet, and swept through Southeast Asia with lightning speed. Their admirals felt unstoppable. Confidence was sky high, and many believed that the United States could never recover quickly enough to challenge them. But one Japanese admiral was not convinced. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, believed that America had only been stunned, not defeated. He knew the industrial power of the United States, and he feared that Japan had awakened a giant that would soon strike back. So Yamamoto formed a plan. He wanted to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap and destroy them in one decisive battle. His target was Midway Atoll, a tiny set of islands in the middle of the Pacific. By capturing Midway, Yamamoto believed he could force the Americans into a direct fight at a place and time of his choosing. The idea seemed brilliant, but before the operation could begin, the Japanese Navy ran a series of war games to test the plan. These war games were not casual simulations. They were highly detailed tabletop exercises played with miniature models, dice, mathematical rules, and experienced officers acting as opposing commanders. Every move and every outcome was supposed to follow strict logic, probability, and real-world capability. The purpose of the war game was simple: identify weaknesses, find flaws, fix the plan before real lives were at stake. But there was a problem. The Japanese Navy did not want to see a flawed plan. Many of the officers running the simulations had already convinced themselves that the Midway operation would be an easy victory, and as soon as the games began, the first warning sign appeared. During the simulation, the American forces responded much faster and more aggressively than the Japanese expected. The dice rolls determined that an American carrier force would appear earlier than predicted and launch a surprise attack on part of the Japanese fleet. According to the rules of the game, one of Japan's carriers should have been immediately destroyed. But the umpire of the game, an officer responsible for judging the results, refused to accept it. He simply declared that the hit did not sink the carrier and allowed the Japanese side to continue with full strength. This was the first major rig in the war game, but not the last. Later in the simulation, American aircraft launched another strike. Again, the mathematical outcome showed severe damage to multiple Japanese carriers, and again, the referee overruled the results. He argued that Japanese pilots were superior, or that American pilots must have missed their targets, even though the rules did not support those claims. It became clear that the war game was no longer a realistic test. It was being adjusted piece by piece to produce a Japanese victory. Then came the most shocking moment of all. In one part of the simulation, the Japanese fleet attempted to scout for American carriers just as they planned for the real battle. But according to the dice rolls and simulation rules, the Japanese scouts failed to find anything. Meanwhile, the American scouts succeeded in locating the Japanese fleet. This meant that in the real-world situation, the United States would have launched the first strike, and that strike could easily cripple Japan's naval power. The officers playing the American side celebrated quietly. Their prediction model had proven effective, but once again, the umpires stepped in and changed the outcome. They declared that even if the Americans found the Japanese fleet, they would not strike quickly enough or accurately enough to cause real damage. So the Japanese side was allowed to continue the game with no losses. By the end of the war games, Japan achieved a clean victory. Their carriers remained strong, their timing was perfect, their invasion was successful, and their admiralty felt reassured that the operation had no serious risk. But deep down, many officers knew the truth. They knew the games had been forced to produce the answer that Yamamoto and his senior commanders wanted to see. One officer later recalled that he felt sick watching the rules being bent because he knew lives would be lost as a result. But he also said that no one wanted to challenge the system. Japan's military culture in 1942 punished anyone who questioned authority. Loyalty mattered more than honesty, and that cultural mindset allowed dangerous mistakes to survive uncorrected. Now fast forward to June 1942. The real Battle of Midway begins, and almost immediately everything that the original war game predicted but the referees ignored starts coming true. American intelligence had already broken Japan's naval codes. They knew the attack was coming. They were waiting. American scouts found the Japanese carriers early in the battle, just like the simulation predicted, and the Americans struck first, just like the simulation predicted. What followed was one of the most stunning reversals in naval history. In less than 5 minutes, American dive bombers destroyed 3 of Japan's frontline carriers. Another would fall later in the day. These were the same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, and now they were burning wrecks sinking into the Pacific. By the end of the battle, Japan lost 4 carriers, more than 300 aircraft, and many of its best pilots. The heart of the Japanese Navy was gone forever. And the worst part is that the Japanese war games had predicted this exact outcome months earlier. But the warnings had been ignored, rewritten, or erased to avoid humiliating the command. After the war, surviving Japanese officers admitted that the Midway war games were manipulated. Some even said that if the results had been taken seriously, the operation might have been cancelled or drastically changed. The irony is almost unbelievable. If Japan had been honest with themselves during those tabletop simulations, they might have avoided one of the most decisive defeats of World War II. But instead, confidence, pride, and a refusal to face uncomfortable truth blinded them. The story of Japan's rigged war games is more than just a fascinating historical twist. It is a lesson about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of honest evaluation. War is unpredictable, but simulations and exercises only work if people are willing to accept outcomes they do not like. In the end, the dice that predicted Japan's defeat were right all along. The only reason Japan lost in reality, the same way they lost in the original simulation, was because they refused to believe the truth their own system had revealed. This is the story of how Japan rigged their war games to win, and lost a real war exactly the way the dice predicted.